All right, how is everybody doing? Welcome to the stream. I have a very special guest on board with us today, ImportJG. He is a Predecessor. Welcome, Import. Please, if you would be so inclined, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Hey, thanks for having me, JPie. Obviously, my name's Import. Otherwise, my friends call me Aaron. And I've been testing Pred for probably about since last October. I honestly don't remember, but it's been a little bit over a year now, right? And realistically, I've been playing MOBAs for most of my life since I was about 16. I started playing League in Season 2, moved on to Dawngate, and then just played League until I eventually went to Smite and then Paragon.
So, just a question for the fans out there. Who is your favorite hero in Paragon?
Personally, I think the Monolith Grux was probably my favorite hero, just in terms of I felt like the hero felt incredibly impactful in the right hands, but also felt very fair to play against. In terms of a competitive pick, it was really good in a lot of different matchups, and I feel like he could fit into a lot of compositions. So I would definitely say the Monolith Grux with the old clap and the shorter range pull when he still had the dash as well. This is definitely my favorite hero.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Did you ever get to experience my favorite bug of all time, the Grux box bug?
I've only seen it through Spectator, but I think actually I saw Box Kwong. It was in one of the PCLs that I played in.
Really?
In one of the highlights. Yeah, in the PCL EU number 5, the only real notable tournament that I played in. Karma, the offlaner for Toronto Esports, he was like Box Kwong or something like that. But I never got to see the bug myself now, like not in game or anything.
I see. Well, Import, I'll let you know what I'd like to accomplish with the talk today. I'd like to jump into Pred, find out and talk about as much as we possibly can, because full disclaimer, we will not be able to really touch upon anything that is unreleased, just for anyone out there. And aside from that, I'd also like to just talk about the state of the Paragon race, the Paragon successor race, and the future of it, and where you see it going. And do you have anything you'd like to achieve today, specifically, Import?
Oh, no, not really. I mean, obviously there's been a plethora of just really unfair things that have been said about Pred and other things, and things have become incredibly tribal. I just hope in order to quell those a little bit, maybe bring in a little bit of insight, and also just share my opinion, because I feel like I'm one of the few people who has actually been behind the scenes in these projects. Obviously, things might have changed since I've been behind like Fault or like Overprime, but it's like I do know to a degree like how these things operate, and obviously I won't go into specific details. But it's like that is like my background in regards to the Paragon race, right? Is that I know how these people are, and like I said, I think there's just a lot of unfair things being said right now. So I'd like to at least calm some of those down.
I agree. I didn't mention it, but you're 100% right. The less tribal warfare we have, the better. I'd like us to approach it from a standpoint of a consumer. And I'll have a little bit more to say on that later. But now, getting into the next topic of discussion, Paragon failed for many reasons. It was, everybody has their own opinion on it. What do you think Pred will do to handle the pitfalls that Paragon faced better and overcome them?
So I think the real elephant in the room, and something that we talked about a lot, at least as like competitive players in my experience, which keep in mind was very limited. I played I did play a little bit in Legacy, but most of my play was through the Monolith life cycle. So I'm not sure what other discussions or what people thought was like right, but it's like a lot of people did talk about we do need like a genuine item system. It was something that was talked quite a bit, and that's the first step. And you can see that every single one of the projects has done it. But in particular, I think Pred has really tried to do something unique with their crests and other things that they put inside their shop, just to make items more interesting, to make builds more interesting, and just increase diversity in general.
Yeah, I could.
And you can go. Sorry.
I was just going to say, you could see some of that For example, there was some items that increase the number of wards that you can have, which I thought was pretty cool. You know, it's kind of like an added layer to support play. And there's like another item for I think it's mainly supports, but I think anybody can buy it. The item Knockstone, which makes wards last 30 seconds longer. I thought, like, you know, it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool touch.
I would say also a big thing that we talked about a lot, or at least like my personal opinion, not we talked about a lot, but my personal opinion was always that microtransactions in Paragon were handled like incredibly terribly. I compare it to something like League, where the best example I can say is that there are certain skins in League that basically everyone really likes to buy. For instance, like Muay Thai Lee Sin. You know, a lot of people identify with the champion, they like the skin, they buy the skin with their own money simply because it's just a really, really cool skin. And I don't know, in Paragon, it didn't really feel like you actually felt like you wanted to spend money. Why? Because everything was through loot box RNG. And also, you just got so many loot boxes for free that eventually you would get like a variant of the skin, right? Like you would get one of the effective chromas or like the recolors. For instance, I never bought like the Molten Rampage or the Rock Rampage, whichever one it was, but I had like the Ice recolor, like the Winter one that I randomly got from a box. Why would I ever spend money on the game if realistically the game just gives me everything for free? The only skin I ever bought in there was Magma Grux, because that was a really, really sick skin.
Yeah.
And with really cool effects and things like that. But that's the only one I ever felt like I really wanted to buy, right?
Oh yeah. I agree with you. Just I'm against the loot boxes in general. I just, and the worst part in my opinion was how it closely tied into it with the actual gameplay. It was with the cards, because I knew one of the best players. His name escapes me. He was a carry, but he played the game arguably more than anyone else, and he never had Tainted Magic, I believe, which was like a key item if you wanted to play Iggy. So, and he also had he was missing as a carry one of those attack tokens that you buy right off the gate for added damage. So even though he was one of the best carries in Paragon, until they had card crafting, he was missing one of the key items that carries needed. It was a very weird system. I didn't like it either. So, you know, you already touched upon it, but one of Pred's earliest play tests, a lot of criticisms were that the item system was pretty bare bones. They didn't have enough. It wasn't fleshed out enough. That they were lacking a lot of heroes. What are your thoughts on it now?
In terms of the playtest that you're talking about, like I was in the camp as well, where it's like I felt like there just wasn't enough content, and also there wasn't any really super real like interesting item interactions. And I feel like Pred has really, I mean, everything's out in public now, right? In terms of the item list that was in the stress test and also the heroes, a lot has changed since that point, whether people like to admit it or not. A lot has really changed, and the really nice thing about Pred's item system currently is that there are just like really fun interactions within the items. Like there are items that are actually very deceptively strong, but they're still actually very fun to use. The most notable one is Galaxy Greaves, obviously, the one that the moon boots, you know, where it's like you charge up the 0G and then you can jump. It makes characters like Steel or like most of these tanks or initiators like just a lot more like scary, because eventually like you might just not press tab, and then you look and you're like, how'd this guy just get into mid lane and kill me? And it's like, because of the moon boots, right? He just comes in there. But the thing is, the item is genuinely good, and that's what makes it even better, right? Like you can genuinely fit it into a build. You can go like, well, maybe this game I can go this. I can build I can just build different things to actually flesh out my build to actually like counter build if you really want to. And it's not through just raw stats, it's just through interesting effects, where it's like there is an argument that there's almost too much depth because you really do have to look. But once you understand the item system and honestly, you just want to have fun with it, I think it's an amazing system in terms of what we've really come up with.
I can see that, especially with the moon. I'm sorry, did you call it the moon boots? I don't know the name.
The moon boots is more of like a meme name. The actual item name is called Galaxy Greaves.
Galaxy Greaves. Yeah, I've heard from another tester that even you know, characters that cannot overcome the environment now can with the boots, which is cool. And not only that, even a character with a jump or like a Kalari can traverse even other areas of the map, which is really cool. I mean, will people utilize that? I think in time, you know, especially when the game first comes out, most people won't know the exact place on the map to, you know, utilize them. But just another cool example. It's one of the crest legendary items. I believe it's from the Assassin crest, and I think it's called Nex.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you basically, it has a new mechanic, reap and sow. The damage that you do is stored for the next 3 seconds, and when you dash with the item, which is the item active, you do an AoE damage around you. And I didn't realize the applications that you could do with that. For example, with Fang Mao, you normally just want to execute with your ultimate, but the items cause a situation where you might just want to ult. If you're in a team fight and you could ult 4 people, you do that, so you store all that damage on the next active, and then you do the hamstring to store even more, and then you dash for all that AoE damage. So instead of just executing maybe one person, you just did maybe 1,000 to 2,000 damage, maybe more across, you know, 3 to 4 members of the team. It's cool. It's interesting, and I can't wait to see people optimize like how to use it, be efficient. It's going to be cool. I agree. I think it. I didn't get it to be a part of the previous playtests, but when I played in the stress test, it was overwhelming. All the items. You have a lot to pick from, a lot of different actives and stats. So it was interesting.
Just to touch on Next, because obviously you brought up like a really good point. The interesting thing about Next is, while it is a very, very strong crest, right? And it's also one of the easier ones to use. So I'm going to assume that whenever Pred is actually playable, that barring tuning, that this will be probably like one of the more picked up crests, because it's got like a lot of really fun application, but it's also just, like I said, the easiest to use. You just use it at the end of all your spells, right? Like you said in Feng Mao, but then it opens up interesting things where it's like, let's say you get a multi-man fail, you know, instead of like trying to execute and then you get the reset executes, like you can just ult, hamstring, and then next at the end of your cooldowns. So it does open up interesting play, but at the same time, you do give up stuff for that. You do give up the option of going Witch Stalker. You do give up the option of going Ortis, which are all very valuable options. Ortis obviously plays into more of like the hit and run play style, where it's just like it's on use move speed and also refreshes your cooldown. So you could like dash in on somebody, you could pop your Ortis and then refresh your dash and then dash out. So you could play like a little bit more loose, a little bit more hit and run. And with Witch Stalker, it's really just you could like go in a little bit early and then cleanse key abilities and then heal yourself back up. It's really just, there's a lot of interesting gameplay, and they're all choices that you can make in that regard.
I agree. And I brought it up just before, but what was your experience with the stress test and your overall thoughts? Oh, and by the way, I actually, just before we get into that, I don't know if you can answer it, Import, but Rish asked how Pred tests in general. Is that something you're able to answer, or is that just...
I mean, realistically, right? It's like, my personal opinion is that I've always just enjoyed playing the game, right? But it's also just I've enjoyed interacting with everybody that we test with, and also just, I mean, our devs are really just amazing in terms of how committed they are and how open they are to criticism. Because realistically, it's like I just want the game to be the best that it can be, and I mean, they've always been so open about just everything. It's just like they always just, they're very, very committed to actually just making the game work and making the game good. So I would say Pred tests are always fine. Like I said, I enjoy everybody that we play with. I enjoy playing the game, even when, you know, funny stuff happens, like things just, you know, someone just like messes up and then the game's is, you know, like unplayable because we're trying something. Like it's fun.
I see. Thank you. And now, with the previous question I posed, how was your experience with the stress test, and do you have any overall thoughts during, afterwards, anything? What do you think?
I mean, generally, right, it's like just going into the stress test, the elephant in the room is just that didn't go very well and was below expectations for I think everybody, and kind of just, you know, writings on the wall about like basically what happens, which does suck and it is disappointing in a sense. I don't really think there's much of like an excuse to really be had, right? It's like should have been better, will be better, but at the end of the day, right? It's like everyone knows it, including everyone knows it. But whenever I got into a game, I enjoyed it. Like that's really like the baseline of what I could say. Whenever you're inside the game, like it was fine. It was really just finding it.
Yeah. I was one of the luckier ones. I was trying for about 15 hours and I got 3 games, and the game when you got in, it was a lot of fun. But yeah, it was unfortunate the way that it all panned out, but hopefully, you know, with the new partnership that they recently announced, who was it with, Acebit?
It's called Excelbyte.
Excelbyte.
I mean, obviously,
I'm sorry.
So they basically partnered with a studio that does backends. From my knowledge, at the end of the day, like I am just a tester, so I'm not really concerned with these things. But also, it's like I'm not like the best person in order to like
Yeah.
really talk about it. But I'll talk about it lightly at the end of the day, right? It's like obviously things weren't good enough, and they decided to outsource it. I mean, personally, whenever you're somebody who's consuming a product, right? It's like if you fall short somewhere, like I think they've already shown that it's like that is a problem and that they plan to address it.
Yeah.
And that's basically what the partnership is, right?
Yeah, I agree.
I wish I could speak more on it, honestly, but I'm really like a layman in this regard, and also I just don't really mind, if that makes sense. Like I'm just a tester at the end of the day.
Yeah, on this particular question, I'm just gonna disclaimer it that it's purely speculation, especially on my part. To me, it seems like a good move, right? As a company, as a development team, you only have a limited, finite amount of resources, and if you know you can't cover all your bases, you're not going to be strong in every single thing. And if they are, you know, entering a partnership with this third party that's going to help solidify their weaknesses, I don't see what's wrong with that. I think that it's going to be good in the end, especially if like some companies can't. It's a luxury, you know. You every small business hopes to be in a position where they can patch up those holes without stretching themselves too thin. So I think overall it's a good move. And from my understanding, I believe they provide resources and maybe software to help out. I don't think that they actually like do any coding or building, but they consult. But then again, just take that with a grain of salt. It's all speculation on my part.
I genuinely just have no idea in terms of like what they actually do. Like I said, I'm in a sense I'm just a consumer and a tester, just like you, and I don't really care or like involve myself in that regard. So it's like it's hard for me to really say like what the actual partnership is. It's just it's there.
Yeah. Well, you know, it was big enough for them to announce, so I think that it you know it's a pretty big move, because for like you said, the average consumer, it doesn't really mean much. Like you know, we're pretty involved in the pred sphere, but again, like you're you know, you're an actual tester. I'm just a player, and it's like yeah, it sounds awesome, but I haven't, you know, at the end of the day, I don't know exactly what they do either. But anyway, let's move on to the next thing. So after, with all things that are said and done with the stress test, moving forward, what do you hope to see with Pred? Because they, you know, everybody, you know, I might as well just say it now because everybody on Reddit is going to ask. We can't talk about when the console's coming out. We can't talk about release dates, and we can't talk about if your favorite hero is going to be in it. But Pred did promise a stress test and early access release. Now, my own personal feelings is that it's getting kind of late in the year. I could see possibly another stress test, but I feel like that it's probably early access is probably going to be pushed back to maybe like Q1 2022. I understand you're under NDA, but is there anything that you want to add? Is there anything that you can talk about here?
Realistically, nothing's really public aside from the fact that obviously Pred does want to add all Paragon characters along with, I mean, that's their own unique stuff. Realistically, I think that's the goal of every single one of these Paragon successor projects at the end of the day, right? I mean, you see it in Vault, you see it in Overprime as well. Like, that is the goal at the end of the day. So to answer if your favorite hero is going to be in, most likely.
Oh yeah, in time, yeah. But I was just because you always see on all social media, hey, when's Crunch gonna be in there? When it's in every post.
Yeah,
so just anybody out there on the Reddit, your hero might be in there. Just anyway. Yeah, I'm sorry. Continue.
Nah, it's I mean, realistically, right? It's like everything is truly just speculation at the end of the day in terms of. I'm honestly not sure what's been publicly said in terms of release date, like console, like anything like that. I'm really not sure at all. All I can really say is that, I mean, our devs are good and they work. I can't say the same about all the projects.
Yeah, and I think I speak for not only the Predecessor community, but the entire Paragon community when I say, Omida, please bring back Wukong, OG Wukong, in his original state. We love him. We love him. He's one of my favorite characters. But anyway, do you have any interesting stories about testing import? Any kind of funny, interesting stories you want to share?
None that I could share, but
okay.
None that I could share, but we have a lot of fun, right? That's really all it is. It's just like, I mean, everybody works at Omeda whenever stuff just goes wrong. I mean, it's just normal. It's like we always just we have a lot of fun. So I wish I could share more, but I don't know. It's just we have a lot of fun over there.
Yeah. I hear ya. I see that. I mean, it's from the few games I played, it's a cool kind of environment there. But is there anything particular to Pred that you'd like to touch upon before we move on to the next subject, or should I just get right into it?
Nothing that really comes to mind. If there's anything that you were like curious about, like I'd love to expand upon it. But I had nothing that I really wanted to add personally.
Okay. What are your, so I do have something that I'd like you to expand on before we move on to the next topic. What are your thoughts on support Kalari?
Horrible.
Okay.
And I hope it stays horrible.
All right. Well, that answers that. Okay. So now Pred is it's one of the favorites among the Paragon successors.
Yeah.
But recently, OP as an Overprime has been making a bit of a splash. Have you kept up with any of their announcements recently, Import?
Oh, I keep up with every single one, all their videos that they come out with. I mean, I love Overprime. That was the first Paragon remake that I played, actually. I played in their like only tournament that they had, which was kind of just for fun. It wasn't anything serious, right? With all my friends like Ray, Blood Mortius, Undead Pilot, and Shinx, right? Like all notable names in Paragon. And I mean, we had a lot of fun. I mean, in general, I just love. I love everything from OP, man. Like OP has a very, very special place in my heart because I don't know. Like it's hard whenever I've talked to the Koreans personally. Like I say, the Koreans is a generalization, right? But it's like people like GBO, like Ranger, and Jon Snow, etc. And they're lovely people, and they really do care, right? And honestly, they are insane in their own right in terms of like just the tech side and what they can implement and stuff like that. Like they are actually cracked when it comes down to developing their game, and they care a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's just I might be mistaken, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with saying Koreans. I believe that we're referred to as foreigners just because that's kind of like the nature of how this speech formulated there. Mm-hmm. Like anybody, because it's like a tight, very homogenous country, so it's perfectly acceptable in my eyes. But I I've watched some documentaries, and they do have a very interesting gaming culture. I can definitely say that. And since they are Korean devs making this game, I suspect that, we see some of just, some of their own inclinations, like the faster gameplay. Now, because like what do you think about that? That's always the biggest criticism, and the biggest red flag that most people feel. It's just that hyper fast action gameplay. What do you think?
Yep. So, I mean, the thing is, like, there's like a lot of like stigma around just Asian games in general in the West. It really just comes to people being burned by a lot of things, and also just gaming culture being different, as you alluded to, right? In China, for instance, it's quite normal for like free to play games to be, in a sense, pay to win, right? Or just full on pay to win, because that's just kind of acceptable in their culture. And honestly, obviously in the West, it's definitely not acceptable, especially within PC gaming, right? Like mobile gaming is a little bit different, obviously, you see, but there are elements in there that obviously people worry about, right? It's also just the idea that it's like it might be like a little bit harder to understand the devs in that sense. So I can understand where it's like people come from in that regard, but I don't know. I think I think OP is going to be great, and I think it's really just a matter of a fact of like what you want from OP. For me, I look at OP and I go like, I'm not necessarily sure if this game is going to be the true Paragon successor, the esport that everyone wants, and all this stuff. But I think it's just a really good bit of fun. Like, that's how I've always treated OP. Like, yeah, I could complain whenever I was playing in the tournament about balance, right? I could complain about like, man, this thing is just really annoying to play against, so really broken. But conversely, there's also just really, really fun and interesting things you could do in that game. And I feel like they're going to show up in the same way, where it's just like, I'm not sure if the game's going to be good in a sense of what you classify as good, but I bet you it's going to be fun.
I think so too. That's kind of the vibe that I got. It doesn't strike me as the most strategic MOBA, but I don't want to jump to conclusions in my judgments until I really get some time with it. Because the way that I see it, there's positives and negatives. So, for example, you have the pace of the gameplay, right? You start off with all abilities and the ultimate right off the jump. It's really fast. Since you're attacking quicker and you're moving quicker, that means you're missing more shots, which leads me to believe the mechanical skill ceiling is going to be very high. And then maybe, that's like something that lends itself well to the overall game, because, one of the most exciting things to do as a spectator is to see a pro player play at a level that is just really fun to watch. And that in that way, it lends itself well to that. And if it's fun for casual players to watch, then that's going to help cultivate even more fandom for the game, and a healthy casual player base, which is in turn going to feed into the competitive player base too. Okay, I apologize for that. Anyway,
no, you're all right. All right.
Thank you for the read, but regardless, having that kind of entertainment value aside from the gameplay itself for casual players, it's going to help feed into the competitive player base as well. And what I think about it is this: Paragon failed, their formula failed. So the formula for a third person MOBA, the formula for success hasn't been discovered yet. Could Overprime have that formula? Yeah, absolutely. I could see thousands of people coming home from work just firing up a game and just have like flinging spells and ultimates nonstop for 50 minutes, because that's all they have to play. But
yeah, I mean, realistically, right, it's like to kind of just expand more about OP, right? Obviously touched upon hit scan, and I mean, we actually went through phases in OP whenever I was playing it back in Legacy Overprime. Go back when they were on the Legacy map and exclusively balancing around the Legacy map. There was a time when it was projectile, and now obviously it went to hit scan. And during the time I was playing, it went to hit scan, and it was like kind of I would say it's definitely like a contentious topic about like whether or not hit scan should be in the game in terms of AD carry auto attacks. From my understanding, they did it because obviously we were running on peer to peer back then in Legacy OP, so it was just easier in general to play on ping as opposed to having projectile gameplay. I'm personally just a fan of just always being projectile. I'm somebody who just grew up on games like Halo and stuff like this. And I enjoyed like Realm Royale the most whenever it was projectile. And even Paragon was like vaguely projectile, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I do think that projectile gameplay is just better in general. But it's like, I do think there are like maybe arguments for hit scan. You could even argue that you want AD carry auto attacks in general to be more consistent in some fashion, right? Whether it's like hit scan or projectile, just so that they're easier to balance, right? Because the difference between like an isometric game like League and between like a third person game is that realistically it's very hard to tune whenever people can miss auto attacks. Or not, it's hard, but it's harder. It's a difficult problem to solve. So I'm not sure if hit scan is the best way. I don't think it is. I prefer it to just be projectile, but I don't necessarily hate hit scan in general. That's kind of where I stand on that. But there's a lot of other things that OP is doing that's actually quite interesting. And I kind of just wanted to ask you a question, actually. Mm-hmm. Because like you said about them having all three abilities, the game's just generally being faster. How do you feel about brushes?
Oh, you're referring to like the bushes that cloak you? Mm-hmm.
Because they're inside the lane as well. That's the thing that I find curious.
So yeah, I have an opinion on that. Now I watched one of the Overprime videos where they interviewed some of the players after the playtest, and I don't know if it was just in either one or both of the videos, but they mentioned that the brush didn't really play that much of a factor. And initially, before I watched that, I thought, it could be really bad. It seems like it'd be a major thing, and you definitely do have situations, because you saw it in the playtest game where you have like right at the start of the game, you have 5 people go to one part of the lane and all hide in the bush, and then some poor unfortunate opponent just walks right by and just gets dogpiled on, and that's gonna happen. That's gonna happen a lot. But I don't know. Apparently, some of the players felt like it wasn't a big deal. Me personally, I think if it's done strategically and it's in good places, and you have a good ward system, it could be offer another layer of gameplay that'd be cool. It's definitely going to keep you on your toes, because you never know if there's going to be an enemy hero in that brush or not when you're approaching it. But I haven't tested it yet, but I would love to.
Because the interesting thing is, right, is because I've also thought about this myself quite a bit, just in terms of brushes, right? Because realistically, brushes play like a very pivotal part in the laning phase in League, because it allows you to drop minion aggro, right? Mm-hmm. And so this means that as a ranged champion, you can go in, auto attack, go into a brush, drop the minion aggro. So realistically, it makes auto trading a little bit more potent in range. You can argue whether or not it should, right? That's like more of a balance concern. But it's also, in my mind, it's like it does affect like the feel of the game and the feel of the lane, and like kind of the strategies or gain advantages in the lane. So realistically, my biggest issue with it personally has always been that in terms of a game that has like such high fidelity, right? Whether it be Pred, Overprime, or Fault, in terms of the characters are so like defined, right? And are in like more of a, instead of being more of like a cartoony, how do I describe it? Instead of them being more cartoony, they are just more like fleshed out and use like a lot darker, like a darker color palette, right? Instead of like a lighter color palette, like, League does, or like Overwatch, like games like this, right? So I find it that whenever like these very high fidelity characters like appear and then disappear like rapidly, like I imagine that it looks really weird, right? Like that's like the first thought that goes into my mind, because I feel like brushes are the perfect solution in a sense, but then actually how it plays in the space is something different. right? And I think that's the problem when you alluded to, oh, hey, like no one really knows like the third person formula yet. Obviously, Smite has their own way of doing things, but even Smite has like some really, in my opinion, really unfun interactions, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
So yeah, that's why I think brushes are curious, and I'm actually really excited to see how they play out. Like I don't have the highest of hopes, if I'll be honest, in terms of brushes. Maybe it is just really cool though, and if that's what it is, you know what else you want to know? Maybe the other Paragon projects are more willing to take a risk into it. Maybe they see how it works out in Overprime. That's why I love Overprime. They're not scared to try things, even if I think that they're outrageous. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing that I witnessed in a match was due to the travel speed. I'm sorry, the travel mode. It was the duo lane just minding their own business, 2v2, and then you have the solo laner use the teleporter to travel to the duo lane, and the mid laner rotate. And then within a matter of like 10, 20 seconds, it was a 4v2. How do you feel about the travel mode and how that's going to play out?
So travel mode, obviously, the biggest issue with travel mode, because it actually does solve like some issues, but it breeds like one very, very bad issue in general. And you saw this in where I didn't really play that much Legacy, but I did play Legacy OP, and we still had these issues. It's more just the idea of like how whenever it interacts in combat or whatever, it stops you from being in combat, it just feels incredibly frustrating. And for lack of better words, it's just very cancer to play around. It's just very unfun for the player that's playing against it whenever it's actively used within combat. For instance, you're getting ganked and then you pop travel mode, somebody misses an auto attack, you get into travel mode, and then you just zoom on by because you're in travel mode and he isn't. So in general, I feel like travel mode is something that is pretty much impossible in order to balance and really make feel like really good. Does that mean that it's not a good mechanic? That's kind of just... I think you could technically make it work, maybe. I don't have the highest of hopes, but I think you could make it work if you had like other systems in place. But I think you'd have to really like flesh out the game like a lot more and become, you would have to like double down and become even more unique in order to make travel mode work, if that makes sense.
I hear you. I think there could be a way it can be implemented well. Personally, from what I've seen, I haven't played it, but from what I've seen, I do hope that they remove it, simply because watching their testing games, what happened often, for example, when they were going after Orb Prime, was that the Orb Prime holder automatically popped travel mode, and his team their goal was simply to just stop the enemy team from getting into travel mode. And sometimes they'd be successful because like you said, all you need is one auto attack to just put it on the timer again, and the person with the Orb Prime buff is zipping across the map, and it's impossible for the others to catch up. But I also don't like how, if you are on the back foot and they're trying to score a kill on you, a lot of the gameplay that I saw revolved around just disengaging just enough to get that travel mode activated, and then once it was if you manage to, you're out. And I obviously I can feel different about it if I play it, but I do hope that maybe if they implement it better, or maybe it's not a big problem at all, maybe I'll actually like it when I play it, who knows. But where I stand right now, I hope that they find a solution that doesn't have the travel mode, because I like the idea, but I'm not crazy about how it plays out.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, it sounds like you're pretty on board with with the way that I said it as well, right? It's just that like it's not necessarily a bad idea in practice, but within like the way that it interacts within the current space just isn't conducive for fun or healthy gameplay, right? If anything, like it does solve issues in terms of you need to be able to traverse this big map. You can't make base move speed higher because that has its own implications, right? So it's like you have to have this like limited time that you can just like burst with speed in order to rotate in between lanes. But again, it's like you do need more of a creative solution in terms of like, that's why I said it's like you would almost need to double down and make the formula even more interesting, right? Like you have to do something even more crazy. Like I couldn't even think of like an idea off the top of my head, right? but it's like you would need to really make it so that the game was like super unique. Like you might not even call it a MOBA at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like that's how far I think you would have to go to really like make something like that work, right?
Yeah. I think in now I don't know what if you'd agree with this, but in terms of innovation, in just breaking out of the traditional formula, which the comparison that I'm thinking of now is Smite, because it's like the archetypical third person MOBA. Like it has the biggest player base of any third person MOBA. I do think OP is the most unique, but also the furthest away from being a MOBA itself. So it might turn into something entirely different. The way that I describe to people now is it's an action game with MOBA elements, as opposed to Fault and Predecessor that I describe as MOBAs.
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair.
Now, how about we dive into the strengths and weaknesses, or rather strengths that each project has over each other. And since we've been talking about Overprime, I'm gonna jump in with probably what I feel is one of the biggest and most interesting strengths of Overprime. So
Okay.
they've stated upon early access release they're gonna have 22 heroes, which is only one more than Fault has currently. So Fault has a very strong cast too. Predecessor currently, according to what we know, they have the lowest cast. But this is where the interesting part comes in. Overprime is going to be the first successor project with a unique hero implemented. And it's like, for those of you who may have seen, it's this like girl with a whip, kind of like Ivy from Soul Calibur. It's like a whip sword. Did you see that?
Yeah, I saw it briefly. I think the character's name is like Adele or something like that, which I thought it was. There's been all that talk with like the Overprime names, and I was just like, that's quite a curious name in her to choose. Like I don't, but no, I mean the character seems cool. It seems it's nice that they're actually trying to dive into that, and I think it is a pretty big advantage that they're the first ones to come out with like a unique hero, right? And like obviously, like I've mentioned before, like they're like the Overprime devs are absolutely insane when it comes like to the tech side of things in terms of like creating stuff and stuff like that. I'm trying to think of like a good example, right? A good example during my time in Overprime. I think it was like we didn't have Spectator, right? Because they were doing the tournament and they were like promoting the tournament. And I think literally within 3 or 4 days, they made it wasn't a good Spectator, but I mean, it was better than Paragon's, if that says something. Like Paragon's was riddled with bugs. It was horrible, and like people wanted it to be so much better. So it's like just things like that. Like they're really, really insane at that stuff. And I can't wait to see how it works out.
I do think that the first game with a well implemented spectator mode is going to have a huge advantage in just cultivating a competitive environment, because then all the people that want to push a game forward to be competitive are going to be able to cast games, host tournaments, and things like that. So I agree. Maybe Overprime is ahead of the other two projects, because I never have heard of any kind of spectator mode or it being close to completed with Fault or Pred. But
I mean, I'll be quite frank, right? I'm actually very surprised that Fault doesn't have it out, because if anything, right, it's like even on things like Fault Hub Network, they wanted to do that like Fault Challenger League or something like that. I remember because it was early in Fault's life cycle, and I was still playing the game back then. And realistically, the idea is like obviously there's people in SMS who closely collaborate with Fault Hub Network, and so they must have had some inside track, right? And obviously there was an announcement about Spectator, right? But they announced this tournament, and if they actually talk to SMS, which they must, right? Because their devs and other people closely collude in some sense in there. I'm just curious why it's like they would make the announcement if it still isn't here. And that really begs the question, like, why isn't it here? Because in my opinion, when the game has been out for over a year, something like Spectator is actually vital to really just, it's something that it may detract from actually like producing something within the game. But in terms of the amount of free content and like community stuff that is possible as soon as Spectator is made, I feel like it is a must, right? Like I feel like it is a must in the same vein that custom games are a must. Like I feel like both of these things must exist. And so I just found it quite surprising that it's like Fault still hasn't released it. Because I feel like since we're talking about advantages, I feel like Fault is almost the one that is like, it's the easiest for them to just be competitive, right? And I'm not saying that they have to throw money at competitive, right? In Paragon, whenever I played, we played for glory and bragging rights and things like that. And yeah, there was like implications, like if there was a LAN, like power rankings and stuff like that, you wanted to feel good about yourself. But I mean, like at one point, whenever I was playing Fall personally, I was like, those bragging rights were enough. But I just felt like they just haven't supported their community in that sense. And I'm really curious as to the reason why, if I'm being honest, because I've been preaching about Spectator in every single project that I've ever like talked about, right? Like I think it is a must-have feature.
Yeah, I agree with you. Partly also because, like you said, having Spectator allows the community to have tools to create content and grow, which is going to be the foundation of a competitive scene. But just on a player level, why spectating your own replays, for example, that's crucial, because without having access to seeing what happens in the game on the map at the 1st minute, 5th minute, 15th minute, you're just left guessing, and you could be guessing wrong. And for a game to be competitive, you need that kind of objective insight to know, okay, the duo lane was here at this point in the game, I was there, etc. You know, it needs to be crystal clear. Otherwise, you might guess right sometimes, you might guess wrong, but you know, nobody's going to invest themselves in a game where they're just going to have to guess about playing at the highest level. You know, in Dota, in League, and Smite, they see exactly what happens at any point in the game, because you know they have those working features, and it's because they do that people know if they grind and they can understand and have a game plan that's fully fleshed out without these question marks. Because it's like there's enough variables in a game, even at a competitive level. You don't need one of the question marks to just be something that should be provided. But I do hope that all these games have a replay system, some kind of spectator system ASAP, because content creators like I are foaming at the mouth for it.
I could imagine, just for like the potential of like making like really interesting content, right? So I can definitely understand that. It's definitely one of those where I do think it is also like a necessary feature in terms of where it depends in terms of where it should be on the pipeline. I think it's like more of like the more interesting discussion, because I just think, like I said, whenever I brought up spectator and custom games, things like this, like I feel like these are 100% necessary, that they should be in the game. Like just 100%. There is no excuse. Like you must have this in your game. In terms of something like that, like I almost do view it as quality of life, because there are other ways to circumvent it. While it isn't like the best, like I do agree that it is a core feature. It's just about like how important is that core feature whenever you put it like relative to something else. Because me, like I rate that a little bit lower than probably someone like you does, but I still do think it is important.
Oh, it is. I agree. Absolutely. You know, just would you like to just add anything to conclude on that point? Because I have a curveball here for you that I don't think anybody in the chat even knows, but it's going to be an interesting point. So should I just move on?
It's like I think the only thing we haven't talked about was actually just Pred, right? Because we touched on OP and we touched up on faults, and it was just about Pred. I think it's the only one. Yeah. In terms of the like what strengths each project has, right?
Yeah. So you know what? Before I throw the curveball, let's give Pred its due, and then we'll move on.
Mm-hmm.
You can you lead off?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I would just say like the biggest strength that Pred has, and I'm going to say this. I mean, this might even be a meme, right? But straight up, Pred just has the best vision, right? And I know that's totally something that's entirely subjective in terms of like, I don't have anything in order to show you because I can't show you. You know, this is what's so great about Pred, but it's truly just dev diff in terms of like there is an actual vision in terms of balance. If it's like if I come to any dev and I ask them about why can't we do this or can we put this into the game, there's always a reason behind it, and it's like things have always been well thought out, right? I don't have to explain to anybody why like a mini wave should have to be bounced, right? Where it's like when a wave goes under tower, I need that wave to be in the middle of the lane in 3 waves. Like I don't have to explain that to anybody. Everyone knows. In general, just the competency is just the highest in Pred, and that's like really just the biggest example. Now, don't get me wrong, it's like nobody's perfect, right? And even the vision is like, even the vision can sometimes just be like, I might not necessarily agree with it, right? But I can at least see it. And that gives me enough faith to really even just be sitting here and doing these things, right?
Yeah.
So, and in terms of like unique ideas and unique content, I think Pred's shown more than enough, right? Think about resetting Ultimate, you know?
Howie's Ultimate, really cool too.
And I mean, like sorry.
No, continue.
But realistically, like these are all just ideas that have just come up from the devs, right? And like I said, it's not perfect. I'm never going to claim that Pred is perfect, but it truly is just dev diff. As somebody who understands on some level every single one of these projects and how they function, I can tell you that it is just dev diff. Like that's it.
I was impressed one time when my only criticism during the creator capture event was already thought of and answered. It was specifically, I told Tiger Stripe about Sevarog's Q being hard to predict for the blue and red buffs. And he was like, yeah, you just last hit it and you instantly get the stacks. And I was like, oh, okay, that it wasn't obvious, but it definitely is a good solution. Because otherwise, when you have, for those of you who may not know out there, when you have the jungle item in Predecessor, you execute under a certain threshold. And with the bigger minions, it's a little bit more difficult to gauge where that was. But they solved it just by, like, with Sevarog specifically, you don't have to auto ability the last hit to get the stacks on the big minions. You can just you don't have to use your siphon to last hit the big minion. Even on an auto attack you'll get it. So I thought that was like a really clever solution, and especially with things like we'll lead into the next topic with this because I wanted to bring it up. Now a hot topic here is console crossplay, which means you're also going to have controllers come into the mix. And OP definitely, and they might be ahead here because they showcased the video there. It could just be marketing. However, all projects have stated plans for console release eventually and controller support. But I just think that it's some games lend themselves better to being mapped out on a controller, because I know I've noticed that you do have only a limited active number slots for, Pred. I think it's 3. Is that it?
It is 3 active slots.
Yeah. And I think Fault has 6. So you could just have all 6. If they're on a controller, I'm not sure how that would pan out. But sorry, I just wanted to jump right into it. It was so obviously this is like something that's just planned from game design, right? Where it's like these are considerations that you have to make whenever you're going to make the promise of like, hey, we're going to come to console, right? Is how do you map these things out? Because realistically, you can argue that there is always a way. Even with Fault's 6 active items, there is a way to map it out. Now, is that mapping actually good to use? Is it intuitive? Is a different story, right? So realistically, you do have wiggle room in terms of like making things that aren't in combat in order to
You can make things that aren't in combat, like for instance, opening up the shop or basing on like modifiers. But in terms of anything that you need to use in combat, it needs to be right there and right ready for you to use, right? So if you've noticed, like you said, with the 3 active items and the blink, that's 4 things. You know, think about it: 4 abilities, 4 blinks. That perfectly maps out on like, you know, X, square, circle, triangle, and bolt triggers, right? It's like, so these games have like naturally lend themselves to console in that regard. And I'm curious like how much, like, for instance, Fault really has thought about it in terms of how they are going to map this out. Is it going to be good on console in that regard?
Yeah, I agree with you there. It's going to be a challenge that, I mean, I wish them the best. Do you have anything else to add, or?
In terms of Overprime, I'll be honest, like, I'm not really too sure. Like, obviously they had like the console tests and all that stuff, and I'm not really sure how it's going to be in terms of mapping or in terms of like considerations that they've made. They've obviously shown that test and all that stuff, but I'm not entirely sure in that regard.
Yeah. Now, are you ready for the curveball?
I am so ready for it, Jake.
Okay, everybody out there in chat, because I'm sure you didn't know this, but did you know that Overprime has announced that they are planning on releasing a web novel as a Netflix series? That's one of the reasons why they changed all the names of the characters. I think I could say without any shadow of a doubt they might be the winner here in the successor race. But I mean, I would watch something like that, but that was out of left field for me. It caught me off guard. But you know, it just, in terms of their business strategy, it kind of strikes me as odd because, as you guys know, Arcane released recently for League of Legends, which is like this really well done Netflix series. The animation is the best part. It's so beautiful. But you know, all millions of people are familiar with the lore and the characters, which is not the case for the Paragon universe. So will it be successful? I don't know, but it's interesting nonetheless. And that, yeah, for those of you who missed it, I said Overprime is planning to release a web novel as a Netflix series. Like, to me, what, honestly, this might not be the best thing, but the first thing that comes to my mind is that's a lot of like money behind them to be already planning that, because that's aside the game. That's not even it's like lore building, I guess. And it just, do they really have that many resources to be dedicating outside of that? I guess they do if they announced it. But
I mean, it's Netmarble's a really big company. I'm not too like, I guess, informed on them, but I do know it's like they have made some really notable mobile games. So it's like, obviously they do have the capital, they do have the money to do it. I'm honestly a skeptic because I feel like it's quite there wasn't really like super great lore in place for Paragon in general, right? It wasn't really a game that had like super fleshed out lore, and you're also like taking somebody else's product and trying to run with it in terms of the way that these characters are and stuff like this, right?
yeah.
But so that's really like the biggest thing that I'm skeptical of. But it is definitely cool. I've actually got a funny, then a little bit of, it's not a little bit, it is quite off topic story, but I did mention that I played a game called Dawngate. I'm sure you probably never heard of it. It was EA's MOBA. It was an isometric MOBA that closed down at around like 2015. But this MOBA, they actually did something really cool with their lore, which is that they had a comic book series called Chronicles, and every single week they would they would just update the comic, and the comic had like ramifications on like cosmetics in game. For instance, you could like have a community poll that decided like essentially what was going to shape the story and shape the lore, but it also like came out with the skin, right? Reflecting the choice that the community made. Like, it was really cool. It was really involved. In general, I just hope that all these projects do something that's a little bit more community oriented or just a little bit more interesting, right? And so the Overprime thing is really interesting, right? It's like, it's something different at the very least.
Yeah, that's true. I meant like with the whole web novel Netflix thing. It's like I brought that up because it's not anything that was on anybody's radar.
No,
And
it is crazy, right?
yeah, but to your point, Paragon's lore never really had the chance to, get started. We had some like tidbits of info with Bellica and Murdoch and Gadget and Twin Blast being not related, but together at one point. But yeah, I mean, we'll see how it turns out, and that was cool with what Dawngate did as well. But just this isn't the most interesting aspect of the successor race, but I think with accessibility in terms of system hardware, now none of the numbers are final, but I think that's going to play a role. I don't think we should get into it much more than that. Just generally speaking, just to hit the point home, StarCraft Brood War became the national esport of Korea because it was so readily accessible on the worst home computers and at all the PC bangs, and eventually that was overtaken by League of Legends, and now that carries the torch for Korea as its main sport. And League of Legends, as you know, is a very accessible game. So I do think that's going to play a major role. The game that is able to be played on more computers has a better chance of success.
100% it does.
Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to discuss with the successor race?
I just hope at the end of the day, right, we can all just stop being tribal and we can all just try and learn from each other, right? I know at Pred, we try to learn as much as we can from Fault and Overprime, right? Like whenever they take risks or whenever they do things, right? It's like, well, you'd be silly not to watch, right? In the same vein that they should learn from each other as well. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who wins. Because if anybody wins, then we all win.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, we're the consumers, right? I think that's kind of what it boils down to. Like, most of the time, the best product will win out. I mean, that's not always the case, but it often is. And we're the ones who benefit. And from all the competitors, honestly, we should just be happy and hope that all of them succeed, because then all three of them will be competing for our time and money.
Of course. I mean, that's just 100% right.
So I have like maybe two to three more bullet points we could bring up in regards to this successor race, and then I guess we could wrap it up.
Okay.
Do you have, before I get into those, do you have anything that you would like to bring up? Just like any
no.
Okay, so
I'm good.
So one thing that both Overprime and Pred have that are pretty important is anti-cheat. That should be noted. That's a pretty big advantage. I hope Fault, when they start advertising and release for their new patch, they have some kind of system in place, because it's a fairly important thing. Now monetization. Mm-hmm. I know this is going to be a touchy subject. You might not comment on too much, but OP has not exactly released how they will monetize. They just said heroes will be free, and that's all we know. Not everything will be accessible via in-game currency. Heroes will be free, but there will be things locked behind money. So that's all I could find about their monetization. With Pred, I don't think anything has been released in that regard.
I'm not sure what has and hasn't. I'm sure some things have been released, but I'm not entirely sure. So it's like I can't necessarily comment, but I don't know. I'm actually curious, like what you think is like a reasonable model then, considering because obviously you've played a lot of Fault. It's like, do you agree with Fault's current model? Like, if you could change anything, what would it be? I'm actually curious.
Oh, I if it was up to me, they would be free to play before the end of this interview. I made a video in May pleading to make the game free to play because a lot of the game's biggest issues are contingent upon the small player base, and it's been that way ever since I made that video. So that's the biggest thing. Now, when taking a look at the greater landscape with, say, Pred's monetization, I want them to be free to play off the bat. I think honestly that like the benefits you would get from just everybody hopping on board and the players playing outweighs anything that you can the monetary gain you'll get from like a month, like a paid early access period, because it's just gonna make a big splash. There's gonna be so much hype, and anybody like that comes across it and they're like, oh, this is cool, they're just going to instantly be able to get into it and try it out. And that means you're going to have new players playing with new players. And it's just going to be like you're going to build a lot of momentum. With that said, they don't have that much of an incentive if there's no other free-to-play substitute competitor. If Fault's still behind a paywall and Overprime is whether it's not released or behind a paywall, then it's logical to just be like, okay, well, you know what, we're gonna have a paid access period too, and then they can do that. But ideally, now this is what I wish. I want to take the best of both worlds. You make it free to play early access off the jump, but you have like founder packs that people can willingly buy into. So if anybody wants to try the game for free, they can try it. But if anybody wants to like pay $100 for a founder pack and you get these, like this founder skin and this and that, by all means, throw your money at the game. I think that would be like a dream, because you have the people who want to try it but don't have the money to be able to play, and you have the people who have the luxury of the money to be able to support the product too, and they will, and because I didn't really realize this as a streamer, but there's Paragon fans all over the world, and I am grateful to be in the US. The US dollar is strong and it goes a long way. That's not the same case for every country, and there are countries out there where I've heard viewers in my chat say, I want to try Fault, I want to play Fault, I can't afford it. It is 1/3 of my weekly salary. And people who don't want to take a minute to stop and think about that, because $15 or $20 to them is pocket change, that's not the case for everybody. And that's why I feel like Fault shoots itself in the foot, because they could have opened the doors to so many players. But so that's why that ideally that's what I hope Pred does. Free to play, but you still got packs with great rewards if you want to support it. And obviously it applies to OP2. I think that would be the best thing. Free to play. I think that obviously I'm biased as a consumer, but still I think that you get people who want to support the game and you get the people who want to play the game, because everybody can spend their time, but not everybody can spend their money, and you get both people.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I haven't really thought about that too much in terms of should it be open free to play and the actual monetization whenever it launches, right? But I really like your idea, actually. The idea that it's if you want to spend the extra money, maybe there's an exclusive cosmetic, right? For instance, I know that partners in Vault, they get is it the Gideon skin or is it the TB skin? Or is it both?
I think they get everything. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So the point is, right, is I think it'd be cool to have an exclusive skin. Let's say it's limited time, right? You could even put a tag like that. Maybe it's your own unique skin, right? Pred showed off that Jailer Murdoch ages ago and all that stuff. Maybe it's something like that, right? And it's if you want it, it's a limited time, first month of it being there, spend $20 in order to get it, right? I think, and as well, whenever you can just whenever you can just play the game for free, I think people don't really judge the game as harshly, right? I think a big way that Fault shot itself in the foot is that, first of all, the launch was so horrible. Obviously, the Cloudflare situation was unfortunate and outside their control, but there are plenty of other things to complain about besides that, right? And it's like also like you're charging for this game. And that makes it, as a consumer, that makes you feel even worse about what's happening. It's like, I paid for this and this is what I get. If somebody isn't paying for it, they're more inclined to, just do whatever about it, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't have as much stock into it because they haven't put their money down for it.
Buyer's remorse is a very real thing, and people are very loyal to brands, and buyer's remorse can be a strong enough reaction that they will just go out of their way to avoid a certain brand, whether it's clothing or anything else. But it is real. It is a real thing. And so I do think that that's going to be a pretty critical moment for Overprime and Pred, how they monetize it and all of that. And of course, how they market it and everything. Now, I definitely do think that the team with the advantage here is Pred. Now I don't know about in the East, because maybe Overprime is doing well with their marketing there in Asia, and they're just not, like, they're slowly starting to get traction here now in the West. But Pred right now seems to be like the most poised for like a successful marketing campaign. I mean, the Facebook, I think, is the biggest. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. Forgive me if I'm mistaken there, but I suspect it is the biggest. And yeah, I mean, that's not like a, Facebook numbers. That's not the entire story, obviously. But it's just a one indicator that there's a lot of eyes on the game, and that's going to be. I suspect, regardless of the gameplay, how well the marketing is done or how poorly it's done, it could make or break this race. One of these projects might have a phenomenal game, but if the ball is dropped there, then another project can gain ground or even take the lead. Do you have any thoughts about marketing on the games?
I've actually thought about it a decent amount, right? Because commonly one of the things that I hear quite a bit is that, for instance, some of these games, just haven't even marketed at all, like Vault, even though it's been out. And I've thought about it a lot. I'm just like, realistically, well, when you actually think about it reasonably, right? It's like, who really wants to play a Paragon successor, right? When you actually think about like the space, because realistically, you're competing against all the isometric MOBAs. You're competing against Smite as well. It's like, really, like, who are you going to like steal, for instance, right? And I'm not sure. Like, I feel like whenever I think about it logically, right? It's like I'm trying to think about who's the most disgruntled, right? And I'm not the most like. I don't know Dota as well. Yeah, I don't know Dota as well, but I feel like it would be Dota and Smite. Like, would you agree with that? So it's like really, for probably those two in particular.
Yeah, I would say Smite is the clear winner, because I don't think I have friends that play Smite and they play it often, and I don't think I've ever heard a Smite player be like, "I love this game. This game is so much fun. This game is awesome. Man, I can't wait to play more." No, it's always like, I hate this game. This game is terrible. Why do I play this? But obviously they still like it because they wouldn't play it if they didn't. But I definitely feel that Smite is the most disgruntled, and that's that. If we look at it like the gamers overall, all gamers as a huge pie, right? And then you have the MOBAs, and then have overall gamers. The only ones that we could realistically bet on poaching from is from the MOBA sphere of that piece. You'll probably get a few, gamers from other genres, because I had a Steve Superville interview where it's online. He says that there were people who never played a MOBA, not interested at all, but played Paragon when they saw it because they found it intriguing. And there is an appeal that people, because there's a big player base out there that just has written off MOBAs, but due to how Paragon innovated on the formula, it drew them in. So this kind of game does have that appeal towards non-MOBA players, but the main player base we're going to be pulling from is Smite, hands down. And the Smite players seem like they want like a breath of fresh air. I'll be honest with you.
And I mean, like, something that I found really curious, right, was actually, and this was like during the Pred stress test, right? There was actually quite a few like Smite streamers that came along into Pred, right? Like most notably, like the ones that I remember were Professor Loki and Weekend. Professor Loki's like a couple hundred viewer streamer on Smite, like nothing really too notable, I would say. But then Weekend's somebody who obviously pulls a couple thousand. Whenever he was streaming Pred, pulled a couple thousand people, right?
Yeah.
And the funny thing is like Pred's the only project that I've seen him really even care about or really be involved in. But also, at the time, Professor Loki actually had quite a talk with game designer for Pred, Blood Mortius, right?
Yeah.
And there's something that really like hit home for me, right? And I know I've spoken a lot about like not being tribal, but it's like, just give me some rope here, because this is something I find really curious. I think Fault has a lot of tools that they could use, notably free to play, being the ones that have like the easiest access to be competitive, and just all these things, but they just refuse to use them. And that's the thing that's like very baffling to me about Fault. And this is like where it kind of like set in stone for me. I was like, it's really crazy, because whenever Blood's talking to Professor Loki even brings up Fault himself. Like Blood doesn't bring it up, and it's literally just, oh, you guys don't take that game seriously, right? Like Fault is just so bad. You know, like he says it of his own volition, and that really like shocked me, right? Because it's like, for me, I'm someone who played Fault. I'm someone who enjoyed my time in Fault as well, right? For the time that I did, whenever I was playing for Elo and finding reasons in order to play, I did enjoy it to a degree, right? But it's like, it feels like people are so burned in a sense by what happened in terms of the way that it launched, the monetization, the fact that they had to pay for it, and then they got this product and all this stuff. And I do find it like really curious, right? Where it's like, whenever I try and think about it, I'm just like, whenever you start to market, if you're Faults or if you're Overprime, like who are you going to pull from? Like we've talked about, it's Smite.
Yeah.
It's Smite, it's Dota, maybe like some League refugees who just think the game looks cool, like doubt it. But right, it's like, those are the people you're going to pull from. And if like some random Smite streamer just literally says like, oh yeah, you know, you don't think that game's serious, right? I think that speaks volumes.
Yeah, it is the initial impression of the early access release that I feel is the main cause of that. Just because if Fault released early access with patch 13, it would be completely different. And I think
100%.
Yeah, I think the environment would be completely different, because
100%.
the game Fault today is 100 times better than early access release. It really is. And you know, there's still time, there's still ground that they can make up, but you know,
100%.
yeah, because they're like all these projects, Fault, Predecessor, Overprime, you know, it's a tricky game, and there's a lot of variables, marketing and things like that, and any one of them can hit the nail on the head or drop the ball. And there, you know, I'm just very happy that I think 2022 will be the year that we see this race come to a conclusion, or at least get close to the final turn. So, you know, I'll leave you. I'll ask you one last question, and then we'll wrap up and bid farewell to the chat. So, do you think that these games can be successful in their own right while existing in the same space, or no?
So I personally feel like that all three games can coexist. It depends on really what you mean by coexisting, or essentially being relevant, right? For instance, one game will win in terms of one game will be more popular, one game will be the more dominant game, but it is quite hard, because I think I think, for instance, OP can exist, and I think Fault or Pred could coexist, right? Because they don't necessarily intersect in markets, or it's like a free choice, right? Predominantly like Eastern player base and like all this stuff, while the other one has a predominantly Western player base, right?
Did you say Fault and Pred, or did you
Oh,
mean
okay.
OP?
So sorry. I'll reiterate. I probably messed it up. I think OP, and then it's like Fault or Pred, like they're on both one side. Like
Okay,
I think like I feel like these can coexist because their markets don't overlap as much, right? On one side it's predominantly Eastern player based, on the other side is predominantly Western. I even think that Fault and Pred can coexist. In terms of like how long, or will one just be completely irrelevant? That's like a different question in general. Because it's like there's just so much that goes into that, right?
Yeah.
So I think they can coexist for a time, but in terms of like, I do think that there is going to be one that is a winner, if that makes sense. I'm actually curious about your thoughts about it.
Yeah, because I mean, it kind of defines it's depends on how you define winner, and I hate to phrase it this way because it's so crude, but in this day and age, it makes me sad how much streaming has an influence on the gaming industry, because more than likely the game that has the biggest viewership on Twitch and YouTube, they're probably going to have the most players too, and then they will be the quote unquote winner. Because if you need an example as to what I mean, Among Us was released like almost 2 years before it actually blew up. It went from having like 300 concurrent players to like over 1 million. And it's because, just some big streamers stumbled upon it, and then it just kind of, during COVID, where everybody's inside and it was a social game, and it just had the recipe to success to just blast off beyond the developer's comprehension but that's kind of like the environment that exists now. And for me personally, it's the game that's the most fun. That's the winner in my eyes. If it's Fault, Pred, or OP, I'll be happy to play the game that I have the most fun with.
Mm-hmm.
But in the grand scheme of things, if we have to be more objective about it, the game that has the most players, the most thriving communities online, and so that's the more objective metric. But yeah,
yeah, 100%.
But you brought up an interesting point, and we'll close out with this. Overprime. Now, I hope that Fault and Pred don't sleep on the Asian audiences. Because
I hope they don't either.
Yeah, because there's a lot of money there. And I'm telling you, Wukong, China loves Wukong. China's the biggest market in the world. It's there's a lot of challenges in breaking into that market. Don't get me wrong, but if you're able to, you can do fairly well. I've even seen on a Pred Steam forum, a Chinese player wrote about how there are Paragon fans in China, and they're hoping that they include Wukong in there. And I know I was memeing about Wukong earlier, about the current state. That was a joke. But no, Wukong does have a huge fan base. He does. And he would be mandatory if you want to break into at least China's market. I don't know about, and I wouldn't say that about the rest of Asia. But OP is obviously going to focus there. They're going to focus their marketing efforts there first and foremost, and then obviously they're going to also open up to NA and EU. But there's a lot of money to be made there as well, and I hope that Fault and Predecessor don't let that slip, because it's an opportunity that they could seize out from under Overprime's feet. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
No, yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. It's the same vein about that. Anybody would be silly not to go to console out of these three projects, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think anybody would also be silly to not at least not even entertain. It's just you should build the game, not necessarily with the Asian market in mind, but you should be ready for it.
Oh yeah,
100%. So
I think that's. We're gonna have to wait to see how it unfolds, but the success between these games and their presence in the East and Western markets are going to be exciting to watch unfold, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, Import, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
Hey man, thanks for having me on. Honestly, like I had a lot of fun talking, and at the end of the day, right, it's like I just want us all to be friends, man. You know what I mean? I think we can learn a lot from each other, whether no matter which camp that you're in, and I don't know. Generally, you should just be more positive about things, man. There's always constructive conversations that need to happen, and we as consumers really need to like just speak up and like say what we need, you know. It's like at the end of the day, that's why it's like I haven't come across a lot of your content, but your free to play video I definitely saw. That was the first video that I saw from you like quite a while ago, and I love the fact that you actually bring stuff up, man, and that you actually try and be constructive about it, but you bring up hard topics. And so I just want to say I appreciate you, bro. Keep fighting the good fight.
Thank you. Very, very kind of you. If you have any socials you'd like to shout out, please do so now.
Follow me on Twitter. I never post, but follow me if you want. It's import_JG. There you go.
Thank you. And so to wrap up, I am right behind you there. You know, it's perfectly fine to have your favorites. Everyone has a bias towards a project that they enjoy. We don't have to demonize each other, and you know, the reality is we're not going to see eye to eye all the time. That's just human nature. But to be honest, we can build better environments, which spurs on these games to greater success if we just work together, if we you know, collaborate. Just even if we disagree, it's great to have that kind of like conflict where one side's arguing against another, and you know, that's what I implore like fellow content creators to do, you know, because I'm a pretty passionate content creator. I can't wait to create more content for these games, and I hope that if there's anybody wanting to create content for Fault or Pred or OP, have at it. Just jump right in, and because there's this trend that I'm not too particularly fond of, where it's just like whenever there's an announcement or, you know, like people can play the game, they just like post gameplay and stuff like that. But we could be doing more, you know. We could be doing more. The developers of all these projects are working extremely hard, and we as the, you know, players, content creators, spectators, consumers, like we could be doing our own thing right now. We don't have to wait for them. We can be having discussions. We can be organizing. You know, when a game does hit early access, we can already have a tournament within 2 weeks. You know, we can be raising funds for a prize pool for said tournaments, you know, and then eventually maybe when if one of these games grow to even higher heights, like we could have, and there's like a you know, a fully implemented ranked matchmaking. You know, we could have bronze tournaments, silver tournaments, master tournaments, you know, like the sky's the limit. So let's not set our sights too low. Let's shoot for the stars. That's all I got to say. Import, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I had a blast. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
It was great, man. Well, again, appreciate you for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. And to everybody out there in chat, thank you for joining us. Hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I will post this up on YouTube as soon as I get a chance. Everybody, thanks for chatting. Thanks for hanging out. Have a good rest of your day. Import, have a great rest of your day. And everyone else, catch you later. Have a good night.
Night, guys.